My name is Zara, and for 5 years my name was synonymous with tragedy, the grieving widow, the poor woman whose husband Liam was stolen by the sea in a freak boating accident. It's a story the world loves to tell, full of mournful violins and pitying glances. They see the 5 years I spent clawing my way out of the financial crater he left behind as a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. They see the woman who channeled her heartbreak into becoming one of the most ruthless and effective fraud investigators at Apex Life Insurance, and they call it inspiring. I call it target practice. Grief has a funny way of sharpening your vision. It burns away the trivialities and leaves you with a singular diamond-hard focus. My focus became lies. I learned the anatomy of a lie, the scent of it, the subtle ways it contorts a face or changes the rhythm of a sentence. Liam's death had been my education, and the mountain of debt his final exam. I passed. I was at my desk, the city lights of Boston glittering like scattered jewels through the floor-to-ceiling windows of my office, a perk of my recent promotion to senior investigator. The coffee in my mug was cold, and the silence of the after-hours office was a comfortable blanket. My caseload was my life, a series of neat manila folder tragedies I could solve and then close, unlike my own. The email from my boss David chimed softly, an intrusion into my quiet world. The subject line was innocuous: new high-value policy claim field review requested. I opened it. The policyholder was a man named Liam Sterling. My Liam. The payout was for $2 million. My breath caught in my throat, a sharp, painful little snag. But the beneficiary wasn't me. It was a holding company I'd never heard of. This was odd, but not impossible. Wealthy people did strange things with their money. The preliminary report was attached. It detailed his death 5 years ago, a sailing trip off the coast of Maine gone wrong. A sudden storm, a capsized boat, a body never recovered. It was my story, sanitized and printed in Times New Roman, but it was mine. My fingers trembled as I scrolled down. Apex had flagged the claim because the holding company that stood to benefit was newly formed, and its registered agent was a man with a squeaky clean and very recent identity. His name was Alex Croft. The system had automatically initiated a routine surveillance package. Standard procedure. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. This is nothing, I told myself. A coincidence. A ghost in the machine. Then I clicked on the surveillance file. It contained a dozen photographs, time-stamped over the last 3 days. They were taken in a small, windswept coastal town I'd never heard of, Port Blossom. The man in the photos was older than I remembered Liam. His hair was a salt and pepper gray, not the dark brown I used to run my fingers through. He wore thick-rimmed glasses and had a full, neatly trimmed beard that covered the lower half of his face. He looked like a retired professor, or a novelist seeking quiet inspiration by the sea. He was a stranger. He was a complete and utter stranger until I zoomed in on the seventh photograph. He was sitting at an outdoor cafe, a newspaper in one hand, a coffee cup in the other. He was smiling at something the photographer couldn't see, and it was there. It was the ghost. The slight upward tick on the left side of his mouth, the crinkle at the corner of his eye that was more condescending than joyful. It was the smirk, the exact same smirk he'd given the morning he left for his sailing trip, the one that said, "Don't you worry your pretty little head about a thing." The air left my lungs in a whoosh. The quiet office suddenly felt like a pressurized cabin, the walls closing in. It wasn't a ghost. It wasn't a coincidence. Liam wasn't dead. He was sitting in a town called Port Blossom, waiting for a $2 million check, while I was still paying off the credit cards he'd maxed out before he died. My grief, the all-consuming black hole that had defined my life for half a decade, wasn't a monument to a tragic loss. It was a sham. A stage play for an audience of one. Me. The broken heart, the mountain of debt, the endless nights spent staring at the ceiling wondering what I could have done differently. It was all a carefully constructed lie. And I, the expert lie detector, had been his greatest mark. In that moment, the grief didn't just fade, it transmuted. The ice of sorrow began to burn, melting into a molten core of fury so pure, so absolute, it was almost serene. Liam wasn't dead. He was just about to have a very, very awkward conversation with the ghost he thought he'd left behind. It wasn't about revenge. Not yet. It was about a claim that needed investigating. And I was, after all, the best investigator the company had. The silence of my office was no longer a comfort. It was a tomb. I pushed my chair back, the wheels screaming in protest against the polished floor, and walked to the window. The city below was a sprawling galaxy of indifferent lights. For 5 years I had moved through the world as a widow. I wore the title like a heavy cloak, at first suffocating me with its weight, then becoming a strange source of identity. Zara, the one whose husband died. It explained my sadness, my isolation, my obsessive work habits. It was a simple, tragic story that everyone could understand. But the man in the photograph had ripped that cloak from my shoulders, leaving me exposed and shivering not from cold, but from a rage that was so profound it felt like a physical illness. My stomach churned. I stumbled to the small private bathroom, attached to my office, and retched into the toilet, my body trying to expel a poison that had been living inside me for half a decade. Nothing came up but bitter acid. I splashed cold water on my face, gripping the edges of the marble sink until my knuckles were white. I stared at my reflection. The woman looking back was a stranger, too. Her eyes, which I had always thought were just tired, now looked haunted by the wrong ghost. The fine lines around them weren't from grief, they were from the stress of paying off a dead man's secret debts. The tightness in my jaw wasn't from sorrow, it was from years of clenching my teeth through collection calls and final notices. Liam hadn't just faked his death, he had orchestrated my ruin. The memories came flooding back, no longer softened by the gauzy filter of mourning, but sharp and ugly with the clarity of betrayal. I remembered the morning he left. It was a Tuesday. He was dressed in his sailing gear, smelling of salt and sunscreen. He'd kissed me, that damnable smirk playing on his lips. He said, "I'm taking the Wanderer up the coast for a few days. Just need to clear my head, you know. The market's been brutal." I remember nodding, telling him to be safe. I'd made him coffee. I'd packed him a thermos. I had been the perfect supportive wife while he was putting the final touches on his escape plan. The Wanderer, the boat he'd bought with a loan I co-signed, a loan that became my sole burden the moment the Coast Guard called off their search. He hadn't just sunk a boat, he'd sunk me. Then came the aftermath. The initial shock, the frantic hope, followed by the crushing, hollow certainty. His parents, a wealthy, emotionally sterile couple from Connecticut, had flown in. They'd patted my hand with cool, dry palms and spoken of Liam in the past tense before the search was even officially over. They offered condolences but no support. I realize now they must have known, or at the very least they suspected. Their grief was too tidy, their departure too swift. They left me to deal with the wreckage, both emotional and financial. And what a wreckage it was. The letters started arriving within a month. First from the credit card companies. Cards I didn't even know he had, all maxed out on marine equipment and travel expenses. Then came the bank, informing me that the second mortgage he'd taken out on our brownstone, the one he'd sworn was to consolidate our debt, was in default. He had taken the equity and run. I lost the house. I remember standing on the sidewalk watching the new owners move in, a young, happy couple who looked just like we used to. The humiliation was a physical pain, a hot poker in my chest. I had to sell my car, my jewelry, even the wedding ring he'd placed on my finger, to pay for a tiny apartment in a less than savory part of town. I worked 2 jobs, waitressing at night after my entry-level job at the insurance company, my body aching with exhaustion, my mind numb with what I thought was grief. Grief is a clean, noble thing. Betrayal is filthy. It gets under your fingernails. It taints every good memory, turning them into scenes from a horror movie where you're the only one who doesn't know the killer is already in the house. I remembered our first anniversary. He'd taken me to a small Italian restaurant in the North End. He'd looked me in the eyes, his own shining with what I thought was love, and said, "Zara, you're my anchor, you keep me steady." The memory, once a warm comfort, now made me want to scream. I wasn't his anchor. I was his ballast. Something to be jettisoned when the ship got too heavy. The catalyst for my survival had been the job at Apex Life. I'd started in the mailroom, just needing a steady paycheck, but I was surrounded by the language of loss and liability. I started reading the claim files, learning the patterns, the red flags. I saw the desperate little lies people told for money, and I recognized the echoes of the grand lie that had shattered my own life. I took night classes, got certified, and clawed my way up. My managers were impressed by my unflinching dedication and my uncanny intuition. They didn't know my intuition was a scar. I wasn't just doing a job, I was dissecting the monster that had tried to eat me alive. Every fraud I uncovered, every lie I exposed, was a small piece of myself I was reclaiming. And now the monster had a new name. Alex Croft, in Port Blossom. I sat back down at my desk, the rage cooling into something harder, colder. It was resolve. A purpose so clear it was like a beam of light in the darkness of the past 5 years. I was uniquely positioned to handle this. I was the widow, the victim. But I was also the hunter. It wasn't about revenge, until it was. Suddenly the debt, the humiliation, the lost years, they weren't just a history of suffering, they were evidence. They were Exhibit A. My phone buzzed on the desk. It was Mark, my closest colleague and the only person in the office I considered a real friend. He was a gentle giant of a man, a former financial analyst who'd switched to fraud because he found spreadsheets too predictable. His profile picture was of him and his slobbery golden retriever, Barnaby. The text read, "Still burning the midnight oil. Don't forget, you promised to help me draft that email to my cousin about the loan he'll never pay back. Barnaby is judging you." A small, genuine smile touched my lips for the first time that night. Mark was my sounding board, my voice of reason, his own perpetual family drama with his mooching cousin. Kevin was a source of constant low-grade annoyance for him, but it was a situation he handled with a sigh and an e-transfer. He was too nice. He didn't understand the anatomy of a user the way I did. I needed his help now, but not for the reasons he thought. I typed back, "I need you, office, now, bring coffee, and bring your login for the deep background database. The one we're not supposed to use without a warrant." A minute later the reply came. "On my way, this better be good, Vance." I was halfway through a documentary about competitive cheese rolling. When Mark arrived, he found me not frantic but preternaturally calm. I had the surveillance photos of Alex Croft pulled up on the main monitor. He set 2 large coffees on my desk and peered at the screen. "Who's the silver fox?" he asked, taking a sip. "Looks like he's living his best life. Let me guess, he's claiming he has a terminal illness but was photographed winning a triathlon." "Something like that," I said, my voice flat. "His name is Alex Croft. He's the registered agent for a company trying to cash a $2 million policy on a man who died 5 years ago. A man named Liam Sterling. Mark whistled. Juicy. So what's the problem? The identity looks fake. The identity is fake, I confirmed, my eyes locked on the picture of Liam's smirk. But the man is real. I finally turned to look at Mark, letting him see the raw, unfathomable truth in my eyes. His real name is Liam Sterling. He was my husband. The silence that followed was absolute. Mark's affable, easygoing expression dissolved, replaced by a look of profound shock and dawning horror. He looked from my face to the screen and back again. He saw the resemblance now beneath the beard and the glasses and the intervening years. He saw Liam. Zara, no, he whispered, his voice full of a sympathy that for once didn't feel condescending. It felt real. Oh my God, Zara. Are you sure? I just nodded, unable to speak past the lump in my throat. I had spent 5 years building walls around my heart, and in that one moment of shared truth, a crack appeared. He didn't ask questions. He didn't offer platitudes. He just pulled his chair next to mine, a silent, solid presence. He understood. This wasn't a case anymore. This was a reckoning. My resolve hardened from a cold, brittle thing into forged steel. I was going to Port Blossom, and I was going to burn Liam's new world to the ground. The plan began to form not in a flash of vengeful inspiration, but as a calm, methodical process, the same way I would approach any complex fraud case. The rage was the fuel, but my training was the engine. I couldn't just march into Port Blossom and scream his name in the town square. He'd deny it, paint me as a hysterical, grieving woman who was seeing ghosts. He was a master manipulator. He'd turn the town against me in a day. No, this had to be silent, precise, and utterly devastating. It required foresight, allies, and leverage he couldn't possibly anticipate. It required me to become a ghost of a different kind. My first step was to control the investigation. I walked into David's office the next morning, my face a carefully composed mask of professional diligence. David was a company man, obsessed with metrics and bottom lines. Emotion was a liability to him. I knew exactly how to play him. David, I began, sliding the preliminary file for policy #774B onto his desk. This new claim, the Liam Sterling one, it has red flags all over it. A newly formed holding company, a beneficiary with a paper-thin identity, a $2 million payout. This smells bad, he grunted, barely looking up from his computer. So flag it. Let the junior team handle the grunt work. No, I said, my voice firm. This one is different. The policy was taken out through a very old, very prestigious brokerage. If this is a sophisticated fraud ring, which I suspect it is, they could be targeting other high-value policies from the same source. A ham-fisted investigation could tip them off and send them scurrying. This needs a senior-level in-person field review. It needs a delicate touch. I let the words hang in the air. Delicate touch was corporate speak for someone who won't screw it up and cause a lawsuit. He finally looked at me, his interest piqued. You want to go to Port Blossom? It's a fishing village, Zara, not a financial hub. That's what makes it the perfect cover. I countered smoothly. Fraudsters like this, they hide in plain sight, in places no one would think to look. I'll go in quiet, pose as a tourist, ask a few gentle questions, see what shakes loose. If it's nothing, the company is out a few nights in a bed and breakfast. If it's something, I'll have cracked a multi-million-dollar fraud scheme before it costs us a dime. I was selling him a story, and it was a good one. It appealed to his ego and his wallet. He considered it for a moment, then nodded. Fine, but keep it low profile and keep me updated. I want daily reports. Of course, I said, picking up the file. You won't even know I'm there. The irony was so thick I could taste it. My only true ally in this was Mark. That night, we met at a dimly lit bar far from our office, a place where no one would know us. I laid out the whole story, the debt, the lies, the sheer calculated cruelty of it all. He listened without interruption, his expression hardening with every detail. When I was finished, he drained his beer and set the glass down with a thud. That man, he said, his voice a low growl, is not a man, he's a parasite. What do you need? I need everything on Alex Croft, I said. But it can't be traced back to me or this case file. I need to know where he banks, where he gets his mail, who he talks to. I need to know who he's become. Consider it done, Mark said, pulling out his personal laptop. He was a wizard, a digital phantom, who could navigate the labyrinthine back alleys of the internet in ways that were probably illegal but incredibly useful. As he typed, his face illuminated by the screen's glow, he talked. You know, my cousin Kevin called me again today. Said his car broke down, and he needs $500 to fix it so he can get to his job interviews. It's the third broken down car this year. I know he's playing me, Zara. I know it, but he's family, and my mom would kill me if I cut him off. He sighed, the sound heavy with resignation. It's a different scale, I know, but I get it. The way they make you feel responsible for their messes. The way they use your own decency against you. His small, frustrating struggle with his cousin was a pale echo of my own situation, but it was an echo nonetheless. It was the casual, entitled bleed out that parasites inflict on their hosts. What are you gonna do? I asked him. I'm going to send him the money, he said, shaking his head in self-disgust. But I'm also going to run a search on his VIN number. See if the car is even registered in his name. It was a small act of rebellion, a quiet search for a hard fact to counteract the emotional manipulation. I understood completely. Over the next 2 days, Mark became my secret weapon. Working late into the night, he built a digital skeleton of Alex Croft. The identity was expertly forged, but not perfect. There were seams. The social security number was issued only 6 years ago, flagged for a new adult applicant, a rarity. The driver's license was pristine, with no prior history. He had a bank account at a small local credit union in Port Blossom, opened with a cashier's check from a bank in the Cayman Islands. That was the seed money for his new life. But the most important discovery, the piece of hidden leverage that would become the core of my plan, was not financial. It was personal. You're not gonna like this, Sierra, Mark said over the phone, his voice grim. I was at home packing a small bag for my trip to Port Blossom. In my mind, I was packing a war chest. Just tell me, I said, my voice steady. He's not alone, Mark said. He's engaged. To a woman named Chloe Davenport. And Chloe Davenport is not just some local girl. Her father is Wallace Davenport. He owns the Port Blossom Marina, the yacht club, half the commercial real estate on the waterfront. He's basically the king of that little town. The wedding is in 2 months. The world tilted on its axis. He hadn't just run away to hide, he had upgraded. He'd found a new host, a wealthier and more influential one. He was embedding himself into the very fabric of a new town, a new family. He was replacing me, replacing the life we had, with something grander. The fury returned, hot and blinding. He wasn't just a fraudster, he was an emotional locust, consuming everything in his path and moving on to the next green field. But then the investigator in me took over. The cold, calculating part of my brain saw it for what it was. This wasn't a setback, this was the key. Liam's greatest strength had always been his charm, his ability to weave a convincing narrative of himself. By getting engaged to the town princess, he had made himself vulnerable. He had given me a new pressure point. His new life with Chloe, his ascent into the Port Blossom elite, was a house of cards built on a foundation of lies, and I was the one person in the world who could prove it. My plan solidified. I wasn't going there to confront Liam. I was going there to meet his fiancée. I needed to get close to Chloe Davenport. The family he was so desperate to join would be the very thing that destroyed him. The exodus would start from within. I arrived in Port Blossom on a crisp autumn afternoon. The town was exactly as you'd picture it, a postcard-perfect New England harbor town, with clapboard houses, a white steepled church, and the sharp browny smell of low tide hanging in the air. It was charming, peaceful, and utterly fake. To me it was a crime scene. I checked into a small weathered guest house called the Salty Dog Inn, paying in cash and using my real name but my old out-of-state address. I was Zira Vance, a writer on a research trip, looking for quiet. The proprietor, a kindly woman with flour on her apron, bought it completely. People like Liam thrived in places like this, places built on trust and a sense of community. They were the wolves who found the coziest sheep pens, end-streaked blonde hair, and a warm, open smile. It was Chloe. She was beautiful, in a natural, unassuming way. I felt a painful pang of something I couldn't quite name. It wasn't jealousy, it was a strange, bitter form of pity. She had no idea who she was engaged to. "See anything you like?" she asked, her voice friendly. "It's all lovely," I said, my own voice a carefully modulated instrument of casual interest. "I'm just in town for a few weeks doing some writing. I was told this was the place to see the best local talent." We fell into easy conversation. I told her a doctored version of my story, a freelance journalist from Boston, tired of the city, working on a collection of essays about coastal life. I bought a small, inexpensive watercolor of a lighthouse. As she was wrapping it, I made my first subtle play. "This town is so idyllic," I said with a wistful sigh. "It feels like a place where nothing bad could ever happen. So different from the city. The things I see for work, it can really wear you down." Her curiosity was piqued, as I knew it would be. "What do you write about?" "Mostly human interest," I said, choosing my words carefully. "But my last big project was on financial crimes. You'd be amazed what people will do for money. The lies they'll tell, the lives they'll destroy." I covered one case. It was truly heartbreaking. A man faked his own death at sea to collect on an insurance policy, leaving his wife to deal with millions in secret debt he'd run up. She lost everything. I watched her face. Her friendly smile faltered, replaced by a look of genuine horror. "That's monstrous," she whispered. "I can't even imagine." "Neither could she," I said softly, taking the wrapped painting from her. "Anyway, I'm trying to write about happier things now. Lighthouses and fishing boats." I gave her a small, self-deprecating smile. "Thanks so much for this. I'm Zira, by the way." "Chloe," she said, shaking my hand. "It was a pleasure. I hope you enjoy your time in Port Blossom." The seed was planted, a tiny, insidious seed of a story that would sit in the back of her mind. Now I just had to wait and watch. I spent the next few days becoming a quiet fixture in the town. I'd work on my laptop at the same cafe where Liam had been photographed, the one with the view of the harbor. I made a point of being there at the same time every morning, and on the third day it happened. He walked in. He didn't see me at first. He walked to the counter, his back to me, ordering his coffee with the easy familiarity of a regular. He was Alex Croft, confident, established, respected. He laughed with the barista. He was charming. My blood ran cold, but I kept my eyes fixed on my laptop screen, my fingers frozen above the keys. He turned, coffee in hand, and his eyes swept the room. They passed over me, then flickered back, a barely perceptible hitch. It was a moment of pure, terrifying electricity. His easy smile tightened. A flicker of confusion, of disbelief, crossed his face. I didn't smile. I didn't glare. I held his gaze for a single long second, my expression perfectly neutral, and then I looked back down at my screen, as if he were just another part of the scenery. I could feel his eyes on me. I didn't have to look up to know it. The air around me had changed. The confident stride was gone. He walked to a table on the far side of the room, his movements suddenly stiff, uncertain. He sat down, but he wasn't reading his newspaper. He was watching me. The panic had begun. He wouldn't know who I was. Not for sure. Was I a ghost? A look-alike? A trick of his guilty conscience? He wouldn't know, and the not knowing would eat him alive. My silent takeover of his new reality had begun. He thought he was the one in control, waiting for his millions. He had no idea the company he was trying to defraud was already sitting 20 feet away, watching his every move. The hunter was in the field, and the prey was just beginning to realize he was no longer alone. The shift in Liam was palpable, even from a distance. The easygoing Alex Croft persona started to crack. Over the next week, I observed him from afar, a silent specter in his new life. He became jumpy, his head constantly on a swivel. I'd see him walking down the street with Chloe, and his eyes would be scanning the faces in the crowd, searching for mine. He was a man haunted, and I was his ghost. The beauty of my plan was its simplicity. I didn't have to do anything. My mere presence was a form of psychological warfare. I continued my routine, becoming a familiar, non-threatening part of the Port Blossom landscape. I'd have my morning coffee at the cafe, my afternoon walk along the pier, my evening glass of wine at the local tavern, and I continued to cultivate my quiet friendship with Chloe. I went back to her gallery twice, once to ask her advice on a local hiking trail, another time just to chat. I was her confidant from the city, a safe person to talk to who wasn't enmeshed in the town's tight-knit social fabric. During one of our conversations, she brought him up. Alex has been so strange lately, she confided, her brow furrowed with worry. He's on edge. He keeps asking me if I've seen anyone new in town, anyone who looks familiar. Last night he woke up shouting from a nightmare. He won't tell me what's wrong. This was it. The first crack in the dam. Maybe it's just wedding jitters, I offered, my voice gentle. It's a big commitment. She shook her head, not convinced. It feels like more than that. It feels like he's scared of something. He's become obsessed with this investment he's waiting on. He says it's the key to our future, but he's so secretive about it. When I ask for details, he just gives me this charming smile and tells me not to worry my pretty little head about it. The phrase hit me like a physical blow. The exact same condescending words he had used on me. It was his signature move, the verbal pat on the head to dismiss a woman's valid concerns. I had to fight to keep my expression neutral. That must be difficult, I said, my voice carefully measured. Trust is everything in a relationship. It is, she said, looking down at the beautiful diamond ring on her finger. A ring I was sure that was purchased with the last dregs of his Cayman Islands seed money. I do trust him. It's just he has no past, you know. He told me he was an orphan, that he traveled the world working odd jobs before he found Port Blossom, and decided to settle down. It was romantic at first, this man with no ties, starting a new life with me. But now it just feels empty. There are no baby pictures, no old friends, no family to invite to the wedding. There's just Alex. I let the silence hang for a moment, letting her own words sink in. My ex-husband was a bit like that, I said softly, as if sharing a painful memory. Charming, mysterious, a blank slate. I thought it was romantic too. It turned out his slate wasn't blank. It was just hidden. I didn't need to say more. The seed I had planted was beginning to sprout. The pressure was clearly getting to Liam. He started making mistakes. Mark called me with an update. Your ghost is getting sloppy, he said. He's been calling the Apex Claims Department directly twice a day, asking for updates on the payout. He's using a burner phone, but he's getting aggressive, pushy. He's drawing attention to himself. The claims processor has already flagged his file for unusual beneficiary behavior. You're rattling him, Zara. The news sent a jolt of cold satisfaction through me. The panic was making him greedy, and greed made people stupid. He was accelerating his own demise. The family exodus, as I had planned it, began not with a bang but with a quiet conversation over dinner. Wallace Davenport, Chloe's father, had invited his daughter's mysterious fiancé and her new writer friend from the city for a meal at the yacht club. It was an ambush, and I was the secret weapon. Wallace was a shrewd, formidable man with eyes that missed nothing. He had the quiet confidence of a man who owned everything he could see. He clearly adored his daughter, but he was not a man who suffered fools. We sat at a large table overlooking the harbor, the lights of the boats twinkling on the water. Liam, or Alex, was trying to be his most charming self, telling stories of his supposed world travels. But the performance was strained. His eyes kept flicking towards me. I was the variable he couldn't control. Wallace steered the conversation exactly where I wanted it to go. So Alex, he said, swirling the brandy in his glass. Chloe tells me you have a significant investment coming to fruition soon. Anything you'd care to share? As my future son-in-law, your business is in a way, my business. Liam's smile was a tight, plastic thing. It's just some old family business, Wallace. A life insurance policy of all things. A distant relative. I chose that moment to chime in, my voice full of polite academic curiosity. Oh, how fascinating. Life insurance fraud is actually a specialty of mine. For a series of articles I wrote, I added quickly. It's a world of incredible deception. The most audacious cases are the pseudocides, people who fake their own deaths. It's almost impossible to pull off in the digital age. Liam's face went pale. He took a hasty sip of water. I imagine so, he mumbled. I pressed on, my gaze fixed on Wallace. The cleverest ones create entirely new identities. But there's always a loose thread, a digital footprint, a financial transaction. Or sometimes I looked briefly at Liam. They just get unlucky and run into someone who knew them from their old life. Chloe looked from me to her fiancé, her expression a mixture of confusion and dawning suspicion. Like that story you told me, Zara? The man who left his wife with all that debt? Exactly like that, I confirmed. My eyes locking with Liam's across the table. His mask of charm was gone, replaced by pure, unadulterated panic. He knew in that instant that I knew everything. He saw the ghost at the table, and he realized it wasn't there to haunt him. It was there to pass judgment. Wallace Davenport was no fool. He saw the terror in his future son-in-law's eyes. He saw the strange, intense connection between him and this writer from the city. He saw the story Chloe had told him earlier, and he started putting the pieces together. His demeanor turned from cordial to glacial. Liam, desperate, tried to counter-manipulate. He reached across the table and took Chloe's hand. Darling, this is all just morbid talk. Can we please talk about something more pleasant? The wedding, perhaps? His voice was pleading, desperate. He was trying to use her, his shield, to deflect the attack. But the shield was already broken. Chloe slowly pulled her hand away. The exodus had begun. She looked at the man she was supposed to marry, and for the first time she wasn't seeing the charming, mysterious Alex Croft. She was seeing a stranger, a fraud, a man with terrified eyes and a story that was rapidly unraveling. The power in the room had shifted entirely. It no longer belonged to the wealthy patriarch or the charming con man. It belonged to the quiet woman he'd left for dead. the ghost who had come back to collect a debt far greater than money. The silence that fell over the table was the sound of Liam's world collapsing. The days following that disastrous dinner were a blur of escalating desperation on Liam's part. He was cornered, and like any cornered animal, he became reckless. He started calling me, leaving a string of rambling, incoherent voicemails on the guesthouse phone. At first they were threatening. "You have no idea who you're messing with, Zara. Walk away. I'm warning you." The sound of my name on his lips after all these years was a violation. Then the threats melted into pathetic pleas. "Z, please. I can explain everything. We can work something out. I can cut you in. Just name your price." He still thought this was about money. He still didn't understand that some debts can't be paid in cash. I never answered. I never called back. My silence was my most powerful weapon, a void into which his panic and paranoia could endlessly expand. He was unraveling, and Chloe and her father were watching. The wedding was, unsurprisingly, postponed indefinitely. The official reason given to the town was a vague family matter, but the rumors were already flying. The perfect couple was no longer perfect. The golden future Liam had been building for himself was turning to dust. He became a pariah. Wallace Davenport, a man who wielded influence as subtly and effectively as a surgeon wields a scalpel, quietly cut him off. The invitations to the club stopped. The friendly nods from shopkeepers on the street ceased. The bank that had been so eager to give Alex Croft a mortgage on a new house suddenly found irregularities in his application. Port Blossom was a small town, and the king had withdrawn his favor. The walls were closing in on Liam, and he knew it. His desperate counter-manipulation reached its peak when he showed up at my guest house. It was late. A storm was rolling in off the coast, and the wind was howling. He looked like a wreck. His beard was unkempt. His eyes were wild, and he smelled of whiskey. He bypassed the front desk and came straight to my door, pounding on it with his fists. "Zira, we need to talk. Open the door." I opened it, but I didn't let him in. I stood in the doorway, a solid, immovable object. "My name is Zara Vance," I said, my voice as cold and calm as the bottom of the ocean. "I'm a guest here. I think you have the wrong person." "Don't play games with me," he hissed, trying to push his way in. I didn't flinch. "I know it's you. What do you want?" "Is it the money? I'll give you the money. I'll give you all of it. The only thing I want," I said, my eyes boring into his, "is to conclude my investigation into a fraudulent insurance claim filed by a Mr. Alex Croft, the beneficiary of a policy on a man named Liam Sterling, a man who allegedly died in a boating accident 5 years ago. It's a fascinating case, a real tragedy." The color drained from his face. He looked at me, truly looked at me, and he didn't see the grieving widow or the girl he'd manipulated. He saw the senior investigator. He saw the woman I had become in the wreckage he had left behind. He saw his downfall standing calmly in a doorway, holding all the cards, his shoulders slumped in defeat. The fight went out of him, replaced by a pathetic, whining despair. "You can't do this," he whispered. "You'll ruin me." "You were ruined the moment you decided your life was worth more than mine," I replied, my voice devoid of any emotion, but a flat, final certainty. "You faked a storm to disappear, Liam. But you couldn't have predicted the hurricane you created, and hurricanes always make landfall." I closed the door in his face, the soft click of the lock echoing the finality of his fate. The power shift was complete. He wasn't the manipulator anymore. He was just the subject of an investigation, a guilty man waiting for the inevitable consequences. The final confrontation wasn't a dramatic, tear-filled showdown. I wouldn't give him that satisfaction. It was a corporate execution, carried out with chilling precision in the one place he had felt most powerful. the Port Blossom Yacht Club. I arranged the meeting through Wallace Davenport, who was more than happy to facilitate. The invitation was for a final discussion regarding the dissolution of the engagement. Liam, desperate for any chance to salvage his situation, agreed immediately. I arrived first, choosing a table in a secluded corner of the club's library, a room paneled in dark wood, filled with the scent of old leather and expensive cigars. It was a tomb of old money and quiet power. I wasn't alone. I had made a call to the State Police Financial Crimes Unit. Two plainclothes detectives, a man and a woman, were sitting at a nearby table, looking for all the world like a couple enjoying a quiet afternoon drink. Mark had also insisted on being there. He'd driven up from Boston that morning, for moral support, he'd said, but I knew it was because he wanted to see the parasite get its due. He sat at the bar, nursing a club soda, a silent guardian angel in a rumpled suit. Liam arrived, looking haggard but dressed in his best clothes, a desperate attempt to project the image of the man he had pretended to be. He saw me and his face hardened. Then he saw Chloe and her father enter the room behind him, their expressions grim and resolute. He was trapped. "What is this?" he demanded, his voice tight with anxiety. I didn't stand. I gestured to the empty chair opposite me. "Please have a seat, Mr. Croft. Or do you prefer Sterling?" He flinched. He sat, his movements jerky. Wallace and Chloe remained standing, a silent jury. I placed a thick manila folder on the table between us. I opened it and began. My voice was calm, professional, the voice I used for depositions. "This is a summary of my findings for Apex Life Insurance regarding claim #774B. The claim is for a $2 million policy on the life of Liam Sterling, who was declared dead 5 years ago." I slid the first document across the table. It was a copy of his Alex Croft driver's license, next to his old Liam Sterling license. The identity of Alex Croft was established 6 years ago, using a purchased Social Security number, a federal offense. I slid another paper over. This is a bank statement from a Cayman Islands account, showing a deposit of $250,000 1 week before your death, and a withdrawal of the same amount 1 month later, used to open your accounts here in Port Blossom. That money was taken from a second mortgage on a property you co-owned with your wife, Zara Sterling, a property she subsequently lost to foreclosure. Chloe gasped, a hand flying to her mouth. Wallace put a protective arm around her. Liam just stared at the papers, his face ashen. I continued, my voice relentless. "These are transcripts of your daily calls to the Apex Claims Department, showing an undue and aggressive pursuit of the funds. These are sworn affidavits from marine salvage experts, confirming that the damage to the wreck of your boat, the Wanderer, was inconsistent with storm damage and more indicative of intentional scuttling. And this," I said, pushing the final item across the table, "is a copy of our marriage certificate." He looked up at me then, his eyes filled with a black, bottomless hatred. "You bitch," he whispered. I leaned forward slightly, my voice dropping to a near whisper for his ears only. "You left me with nothing, Liam. You left me with a broken heart and a mountain of debt so high I thought I would die under the weight of it. You buried me alive, but you made one mistake. You taught me how to dig." I leaned back, my work done. "The claim is denied, of course. Apex will be pursuing you for full restitution of all investigative costs, and they will be referring the case to the FBI for wire fraud, mail fraud, and identity theft." As if on cue, the two detectives stood up from their table and walked over. "Mr. Sterling," the man said, his voice calm but firm, "we need you to come with us. We have a few questions for you." It was over. There was no shouting, no struggle. He just seemed to deflate, the last of the air going out of the balloon. As they led him away, his eyes met mine one last time. There was no anger, no hatred. Just a hollow, empty recognition. He finally understood. I stood up and walked over to Chloe. She was crying silently, her father holding her tight. I put a hand on her arm. "I'm sorry," I said, "and I meant it. I'm truly sorry you were caught in this." She looked at me, her eyes red-rimmed but clear. "Don't be," she said, her voice surprisingly strong. "You didn't just save yourself, you saved me." I nodded, then turned and walked away without looking back. Mark was waiting for me by the door. He didn't say anything. He just put an arm around my shoulders and steered me out into the clean, salt-scented air. My vindication wasn't loud or explosive. It was a quiet, profound rightness. It was the feeling of a file being closed, a case being solved, a ghost finally being laid to rest. And for the first time in 5 years, I felt the sun on my face and didn't feel cold. In the weeks that followed, the story of Alex Croft, the charming con man, became a legend in Port Blossom, a cautionary tale told over beers at the tavern. Liam's legal troubles were just beginning. Faced with an ironclad case, he pled guilty. The laundry list of charges, insurance fraud, wire fraud, identity theft, would keep him in a federal prison for the better part of a decade. The justice system did its work, but my real resolution wasn't found in a courtroom. It was found in the quiet moments that followed. Apex life, embarrassed by the near miss but impressed by my work, gave me a significant promotion and a bonus that, with beautiful irony, was more than enough to clear the last of the debts Liam had saddled me with. The financial ghost was finally exorcised. I had a final quiet coffee with Chloe before I left Port Blossom for good. She was healing, her strength returning. She had thrown herself into her gallery and was even planning a trip to Italy, a trip she was taking by herself. We were two women from different worlds, bound together by the same lie. We didn't promise to stay in touch. We both knew this chapter was something to be closed, not reread. But there was a bond of shared survival between us that I knew would never truly break. Back in Boston, I stood in my office, looking out at the same city lights, but I saw them differently. They weren't indifferent anymore. They were just lights. My life was my own again. The work which had been my refuge and my weapon now felt different. The thrill of the hunt was gone, replaced by a sense of weariness. I had hunted the biggest monster of all, my own, and now the smaller battles seemed less important. Mark, in a surprising turn of events, had finally confronted his cousin Kevin. He hadn't just cut him off, he'd paid for him to enter a rehab program for a gambling addiction Kevin had been hiding for years. Sometimes, he told me, the best revenge is forcing someone to finally face themselves. He was right, and that's what this whole journey was about, wasn't it? It started as a hunt for a man who wronged me, but it ended with me finding the woman I had become. For 5 years I was a ghost, haunted by a man who was very much alive. My identity was tied to his absence, my future defined by his betrayal. But in the end, by confronting him, I wasn't just destroying his new life. I was reclaiming my own. He thought he'd left a ghost behind, a broken woman who would fade away. He never imagined that ghost would learn his own tricks, that she would become the phantom in his new perfect life, the silent observer who would watch it all come crashing down. It turns out it's not the sea that creates monsters. It's the lies we tell ourselves and the people we leave in our wake. I didn't stay at Apex for much longer. I took my skills, my bonus, and the hard-won wisdom from my ordeal and started a small consulting firm. I work for victims now, helping people untangle the financial and legal knots left by fraud and betrayal. I give them the tools to fight back, to become their own investigators. I turn their grief and anger into resolve. just like I did. I am no longer defined by what Liam did to me. I am defined by what I did for myself. And that is a story worth telling. So now I want to ask you, have you ever been pushed to the brink by someone's betrayal? Have you ever had to find a strength you never knew you had just to survive? The world is full of ghosts, ghosts of old relationships, of past injustices, of people we used to be. Sometimes the only way to move forward is to turn around and face them. Tell me your story in the comments below. I read every single one, and I know how powerful it can be to finally speak your truth. And if you found my story compelling, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. Sharing these stories is how we remind each other that no matter how deep the darkness, you have the power to find your own light. Thank you for listening.